So thank you so much. I'm going to read some poems from my collection, Partial Genius. These are all prose poems, and I thought that I would read some of the poems that I don't usually read when I'm out doing like readings from this book. I was lucky I was able to go to Florida and do some readings, and that was really fun. But yeah, so now we're doing this online. So it's going to read what we would call the B-sides, like in terms of, you know, like a record, there would be like the main hit, and then there's like the dusties. So I'm going to read some of my B-sides for you today. I know that sounds like super tempting and also awful, and I apologize. So also, you know, when you start reading from a book, you get to put like all these little tabs on there, right? And I noticed that most of my tabs were orange. So I decided to go with blue for today. Because like, why have a bunch of orange tabs? You know, like, it makes no sense. Go Browns. Anyway, so this first poem is going to be called Giving Up the Ghost. I write a lot about ghosts, and I'm not going to explain that further. Giving up the ghost. If you are afraid of history, then avoid tinctures. Disobey traditional recipes. Incinerate evidence, including recent receipts and the ribbons that flowed from your hair as recently as 2001. Pray for mild derailments of trains that shuttled you safely to the jobs where you remain best loved ghost. Most likely to return to the vending machine. Frequenter of the hot cocoa packets early August. The only creature seen reading Russian novels during the 15-minute lunch and then sleeping beneath oak trees on the property after work. When I say I am part cat, I also mean every animal that has ever walked through me, which is a number too large to discuss. Often I start and remember I'm here and it's now, like a fugue state patient in a crime drama, except my hair is probably longer and the panic is invented. In high school, everyone loved and feared the fishbowl. But in reality, we were each more invisible than the last version of us, now either watching our children multiply or standing at the same corner with a slightly slimmer cigarette and new swears. It's hard to remember back before I learned to drive, but it's not like things went any slower. It's just one of many false markers. How many days since you began your last panic? Since the beginning of your latest obsession? Since you figured how best to calibrate the eyelash adhesive? The ghost told me shoplifting was right and made me follow the wrong girls into the fitting room. I wore trash t-shirts and cutoffs with unknown flags painted on them. Legs like how our fields looked after a particularly devastating summer of drought agriculture. The guy was on tether, but that didn't stop me from kissing him pretty hard at the antique warehouse where he worked under police supervision. So many variations on Santa that some were basically a thumb of silly putty with 2 cloves and a little Vaseline and what looked like blood. Gummy candy with a wet center. Gloves owned by the lady alleged of murder as recently as 1897, kept in a case under lockdown per order of the authorities. A devastating collection of postcards, home, that were either never delivered or discarded, or sent back into the war they came from. So this is a book, it's all prose poems. And I guess I should say, they look kind of like, ooh, there we go, like this. They're like in stanza graphs, so they're a little chunky, which makes them fun and also not fun to read. That one's gonna be last. Okay, so reading this now, like, you know, I write a lot about the 90s, and it's kind of weird looking back and thinking like, wow, this is like a completely different universe. You know, like we did all kinds of stuff we don't do right now. And so it's been kind of fun returning to these poems. And this one that I'm going to read next is another one of those that I don't read often, and it's called A Radical Suggestion. A Radical Suggestion. Sometimes we all have too much to drink, and happen to be on a boat. Or in the lobby of a theater, unsure of how to dial out on a payphone. I was accused of being an emotional double agent, a furious hawk, someone worth avoiding, the life of the party, one hell of a life jacket. Allow me, you said, but there wasn't any further statement. I allowed you. It was like climbing a rope ladder while building a rope ladder, and weaving the rope, and hammering the platform during spare time. If I had kept a journal, I would have used the words danger, gravity. A man spoke to you on the plaza, and his name was Lethal Jeff. He liked your sister, and he was talking about me. I was so well cared for, my garments maintaining the veneer of their previous owner, who may have been your wife or an undone mannequin named Lethal Sal. Confession. I purchased a number of blank plaques and awaited their eventual inscription. Vowed to haunt the corner if those inscriptions happened post-mortem. Let's creep this lake forever, we decided. Any tree that could live through us might be more than a footnote. In today's post, do you ever think that we'll go back? But isn't that the premise of every book? My hospital roommate kept asking when I would cut her hair. Your father owned that hospital, but didn't prepare or serve the awful broths. Unlike you, the hospital forgot to release me. All right, the next one I'm going to read is called Elevator Pitch. And I have a lot of fun writing these poems and being silly. I guess maybe it's something about going big where I let myself get a little more fanciful than normal. But it's also really strange not getting to hear an audience. I'm just like, are you laughing? So I'm just going to pretend you're all laughing, but it's really just the wind outside my window. So anyway, this is called Elevator Pitch. She wore a wife uniform. Her hands were post-pine saw. The entire machinery around her was bedazzled with things not dazzling, such as artificial diamond flecks or imitation cinnamon sticks, the kind that are actually tampons and have to be purchased at a specialty store. She did the math, but only once a month. Her mother hand-painted an entire replica village, but it was not Victorian. Mid-60s Central Illinois, the biggest conflict in town, a battle between grocery chains. The man who would eventually destroy me stood beside a green sedan and breathed a body full of the local factories before driving into soy fields. However, he was the size of pencil eraser, so his voice was caught by nostalgic awnings and deflected down a toy sewer grate. The wife uniform hovered over this grate for 16 seasons, hoping to catch something. Meanwhile, I was born on the other side of the continent, already making poor decisions. My aunt let me put dollhouse figures into a pot and turn the burner up. We call this the human condition. I got sneaky in the basement and tried on mildew-tinged wife uniforms, commando, and then settled down with some blank paper and Carole King and a half-dozen ghost cigarettes of yesteryear. In retrospect, the hero was absent for most of his scenes, but that didn't mean he was missing. His corduroy trousers ended up in the cat pan, but that was thanks to the cat, out of uniform and not being editorial in the least. The wife hung her broom up and disappeared. Just another bubble in the bucket. I'm going to read you two more. Sorry to keep you in suspense. I'm going to read a poem called The Big Time, and then I'm going to read the last poem, or wait, no, the title poem. Okay. This is called The Big Time. And I actually had cup o' noodles today, so I feel like there's some serious verisimilitude happening. I mean, I did jazz it up, don't worry, but anyhow, so this is the big time. That summer, we were all big timing, even while subsisting on diet grape soda and cup o' noodles and red dots of pseudoephedrine. We decided to become the let me on this bus with my dog type. We boarded the train at a pretentious street, like someone would mistake us for rich. I had a temporary job at a comedy club nicknamed Fecund City. I would never make money as a dancer. We tried to escape town in an '87 Sunbird. Even the carnival ended up being a letdown once we realized they rolled out the burning cinnamon dough and neon every damn night. Our carnival had a number of improvised rides like the Squirmatron, which was unsanctioned. I preferred a stiff run through corn stalks. I wouldn't give a man a cigarette, and he accused me of lady dying and waved the finger. I buried my college brochures double deep in the experimental corn plot, but they ended up back in our mailbox, along with some mysterious intervention planning paperwork intended for another address. I have never believed in coincidences. People surround themselves with abominations such as artificial cheese and real leather. I would big time a parking attendant if it would improve my perspective. I might big time myself, my next of kin, or perhaps even my favorite stranger. I know it's gross, but I would love to be tall enough to rip things apart and blame it on nature. All right, so I'm going to read one more poem, and thank you so much for listening. So people ask me, like, why did you call this book Partial Genius? And I guess I did probably grapple with different possible titles, but it was a phrase that came to me as I was writing these. Something that I've done with these poems is kind of swapping around the order of the stanza graphs too. So I don't know about other people who've written prose poems if you've done that, but that was just something that kind of speaks to this idea of being really good at some things, but not really good at others. So that's the title, and I was so happy that we found this cover image, which is actually a stock photo. It must be a print ad. You can see there's a texture in it. So thank you for listening, and this is my last poem. It's called Partial Genius. Partial Genius. Being a cigarette girl was nothing like being a suicide girl, but whatever. Try explaining to an eclectic readership that your only comfort is the sound of rain against a dormer window. Once I had a cold reading in a rehabilitation home basement. It reminded me of a shooting gallery with all that nodding and nobody particularly alarmed. Also, the covert counting of small bills. You had to ask a lady to watch the door to the bathroom, and if you took more than 10 minutes, somebody started pounding. I was only able to offer customers two choices, kings or ultralights. Things I could not get clean enough for you. Politics, cuffs of trousers, the entire fleet of public transportation, air and water, tropes of fine literature, religion, but not mythology, that was okay. Croutons lost in their shaggy wonderland. My past, the final page of your checking account register. Peals of Bob Seger, even though we were in an actual church rather than the church of erotic ecstasy. The sirens that you use as an excuse for walking faster. Anything not related to the body, because it wasn't supposed to be clean, and alleluia, at least I did that right. I held the hand-sized radio in my palm and wished it could be implanted in my chest, not instead of a heart, as a sort of companion to a heart. It could only play one song, however, or else it would bleed out. That's a heavy commitment, presuming life has multiple decades. Multiple favorite sweaters dropped to the floor of someone's living room. That's a lot of living, if it's actually lived. Rolling down the stairs like spilled marbles, exhumed from a backyard like a thimble that slipped away. Some Motown hit, poorly remade several decades later. We decided to name a certain hour the melancholy hour, but then fought over when it would be. Morning was both sad and triumphant. There was most likely thunder at twilight. Dinner time was packed with morose wives and their dreams of increased square footage. Middle of the night was only for trips to the loo. In retrospect, most of my memories are about novels. Did I even own a wing chair or just the impression of one upon my back? Was that Us or a story about two characters with similar motivations? The novels never answered. Confession. I was only a partial genius. Please don't say it was the parts you left in me, because that wasn't much. In between checking the knobs on my gas stove, I worried about immortality. We should have been the subject of at least one plaque by now, one tribute panel at a major literary conference. My first time at the major literary conference, we just huddled on a couch touching each other's badges. Then we got lost in our own city, like a couple of house cats. At least my genius was a little bit flashy and held market value. You were a wallet filled with questionable credit. Thanks so much for listening.